Okay. Jeff, so we are here rolling live, kicking off our 2 days of live coverage for the FPA NorCal Conference here in beautiful San Francisco. I happen to love this place, a lot of great restaurants, fantastic place. And you can't really see this for the audience, but it's a beautiful venue, the Palace Hotel. Yeah. So really glad to kick off our coverage with you. So we have Jeff Levine, who is the Chief Planning Officer for Focus Partners. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, or thank you for having me, I should say.
Absolutely. Usually I think the roles are reversed.
Yeah, that's
sometimes.
right. Strike that, reverse it. Little Willy Wonka to start.
So look, I've been really looking forward to this. I'm a huge fan of the content that you put out, and it's prolific, which is just fantastic, and it's always really actionable. So a lot of your content is, we were kind of talking about this before the camera went on, B2C, right?
Sure.
So let's talk a little B2B.
Okay.
So here on goRIA, we're always talking about why should advisors go RIA and how they can. Let's put one more check in the why column, which is some tax benefits. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of tax advantages that as a business owner you could potentially have that an employee does not have. So if you're someone who receives, let's say, a W-2, you're able to access your employee benefits, right? That's basically your main tax planning strategy for work, right? There's other things you can do outside. You can look at charitable planning and so forth, but from a work perspective, it's, does my employer offer a 401k? Do they offer some sort of non-qualified deferred comp? Do they offer any sort of HSA benefits or anything else that I can use through the employer? Now, outside of that, though, there's just not a lot you can do. You're often pretty stuck. As a business owner, there are all sorts of options. For the first part of that is we can look at, what type of plan do you want? Right? When we talk about your employer's plan, it's whatever they chose. So It's the provisions that they want to include, which may or may not align to what would work best for you as a small business owner. You get that option. There's also the ability to deduct all sorts of expenses that might otherwise be personal expenses, or at least part, right? I mean, there's always a fine line here.
As he smiles into the camera.
That's right, yeah. This is, I mean, look.
Wink.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're going to use your car to drive around, you're able to deduct part of it. I mean, it's a legitimate business expense. Now, you should keep track of your miles, and you should do all the formalities in order to make sure that it's legitimate. But at the end of the day, if you were an employee and you were doing the same thing, you don't have that same ability right now. And as we sit here today, there's proposed tax legislation out there, and that would extend all of these disparities between let's say a small business owner and an employee advisor. In fact, we would actually further expand the disparity, because beyond what we're talking about right now, there's also a huge other potential deduction that's out there. The 199A, or qualified business income deduction, QBI deduction, is what a lot of people have heard it. And the proposed legislation would do two things that would make this even sweeter for advisors. One is it would take the current deduction from a potential of 20% of your business income to as much as 23% of your business income. So increasing the potential. But the other thing it would do, today, right now, if you are a high income specified service business owner, which is just really a fancy tax term for a lot of white collar professionals. So think doctor, lawyer, financial advisor, right? Things like that. The calculation for that deduction becomes very easy, because the calculation for that deduction is always $0.
Right.
If you're high income, if you're over certain thresholds, it's just going to be zero. The proposed legislation out there would still phase it out for higher income individuals, but it wouldn't be as quick as it is today. And a lot of higher income financial advisors would still get not just some, but a significant qualified business income deduction. And look, 23% of your business income is a big potential deduction.
Yeah, I remember when that came out. That came out in the first Trump administration, I think. Is that right?
The QBI deduction?
Yeah.
Yep, part of the initial Tax Cut and Jobs Act, yep.
And I remember reading it, and I was like super excited until I saw who's not included in that.
That's right. Then we were just excited for everyone else and sad for us, yeah.
And I found it was interesting, and keep me honest on this, but I think one of the professionals that can do it would be real estate developers.
Yep.
Shocking.
Yes. In fact, right at the very end there, it was just, they were going to do a couple tests for certain business owners, and it was linked only to your how much you paid in wages. And then at the very, very last minute, they changed it to include a test so that individuals with a lot of depreciable property, again, read real estate, would get it, and it was called the Corker kickback by some, in order to get the senator at the time to kind of buy into that deal. So it's yes, real estate. Interestingly enough, though, they were able to certain architects are excluded from most other things. For instance, the 1202 break for small business, qualified small business owners, it doesn't apply to architects or engineers. And for whatever reason, they completely copied that list and then said architects and engineers, you're okay for this 199A deduction, this QBI deduction. So what I learned from that was architects and engineers have way better lobbyists than financial advisors, apparently.
Yeah, how the sausage is made, obviously.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's a good one, because I actually forgot about that one, because I was like, it doesn't really apply to me. We told our small business owners that it would apply to not a whole lot of them, but it'd be great to have that back for us. When do we find out about that, do you know?
I wish I knew, right?
Yeah.
I think probably here we're looking still at sometime over this summer. There's a lot of talk about maybe putting something on the president's desk by July 4th as sort of a landmark date, and this administration's very, very big on connecting those dates with action. So it would not surprise me to see all of this wrapped up by July 4th, and there's still a lot of possibility for things to change. But I think the big takeaway is that while the edges may still be smoothed out, the core of the bill is probably not going to change. So we're probably not going to see, miscellaneous itemized deductions brought back for W-2 employees. That's probably out, maybe forever, quote unquote, permanent, as in tax code permanent, which is just until some other Congress decides to change the rules. But permanent, where again that means that as a business owner, you have another advantage versus a employee advisor from a tax planning perspective. But again, this QBI deduction, it looks like at a bare minimum, the QBI deduction we had is not going away, right? There were some people who said, well, I don't really want to learn about this too much because it's going to be gone at the end. Well, it's not going to be gone, right? I'll go out on a limb and say it's not going to be gone. The only question is, how much more will it be enhanced, right? The proposed legislation isn't saying how do we scale it back. It's how can we improve it and increase it while still kind of being at least somewhat conscious of the fiscal impact. I guess there's some
4 trillion, 5 trillion.
That's right. A trillion here, trillion there. Who cares, right?
So one last thing, because we're coming up on time, and I wanted to go back to something else you touched upon, but just to put a pin in the QBI thing.
Sure.
Give us, if you can, give us some numbers off the top of your head. So what would that mean for us advisors? Like, what would that look like if it falls the right way from an advisor standpoint? What's the income? What's the benefit?
Sure. So a lot of this depends upon not only your total income, but how much of that total income is made up from your business versus other things. But let's say an advisor generates $500,000 of profit at the end of the day. 20% of that is $100,000. In the right circumstances, it could be a $100,000 deduction. That's a really big deduction.
So you think it's going to go up to as high as even the $500,000 level?
Yeah, they're talking about starting to phase it out at somewhere around there. And again, it won't phase out quite as quickly. So really and again, we're just talking round numbers here, but let's go down to $400,000. All right, so it's an $80,000 deduction, maybe more if it's 23%, but still, these are big numbers. And the key here is, it's not a one and done thing. Like we talk a lot about, with clients about, bunch your deductions up for charitable gifting. And, that's like you'd maybe do it once every 4 or 5 years and then you bunch again. This is something that if you're entitled to receive it, you could be getting it each and every year. These are big dollar amounts of tax savings, like real tangible, that actually moves the needle. There's not a lot of things that people can do where every year they're moving the needle on their tax savings. The QBI deduction is one of those things.
Yeah. I wasn't even thinking about that because, again, I've long forgot about it. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Okay. Just to kind of button things up for today, let's go back to some of the articles I've been seeing, some news coming out. And I think you touched upon this early on today, is the idea that, if you're a 1099 independent contractor with an IBD, which I was for 20 years, they're going to start putting the kibosh on that? Or what's the story there?
In terms of whether they classify you as an employee?
Yeah,
there's been a lot of talk about that over the years. I think probably this administration will, I don't think they're as aggressive on that as some of the other administrations. And candidly, if you were to do that, it would really, really call into question whether a whole bunch of other industries are also operating in an employee model. And if you look at an independent advisor who is associated with a BD or something like that, they're getting a 1099 to them. You really are your own small business. I mean, you're talking about you're making your own decisions as to how much you're marketing. You're making your own decisions as to when and how you work. You're making your own decisions as to who and how you pay individuals that you hire. You are a small business owner.
Right.
I know there's been a push over the years. You never know, right? You never know. But I think it's unlikely at this point, at least for the foreseeable future, that ends up happening. You never know.
Right.
But if I was a Vegas odds maker, I would put the odds pretty long at this point that we saw that change, which is a good news for individuals in that model, because again, that would not only upend their business model, but also the broker-dealer's model. I mean, the entire thing would completely change, and probably not for the better in that regard.
Right. Well, fair enough. Well, Jeff Levine from Focus, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Okay, so this is just number one. I think we have 5 scheduled for today, and up next we have Michael Kitces, which is, of course, always must-see TV.
Yep.
So, Jeff, thanks again.
All right.
All right. And thanks for joining us. We'll be back in about another 45 minutes.